1860s during the American Civil War. Housing for a battery of 4 field artillery pieces was constructed at the tip of the Cedar Point Peninsula, off the shores of Lake Erie in Sandusky, Ohio. The peninsula was given its name due to its ton of cedar trees. The point of the weaponry that was housed here was to defend a nearby Confederate soldier prison. Now, a local man by the name of Louis Zistel built 2 boats that transported the Confederate soldier prisoners to the island. Now, a couple years after the Civil War ended, Mr. Zistel had the brilliant idea to open a bathhouse on the peninsula, along with a beer garden and a dance floor. He began boating the locals back and forth for a quarter. And that is the bare bones beginning of what would go on to become Cedar Point. Now, over the next 18 years, a bunch of local businessmen in the area began leasing land on the peninsula, and they constructed a number of additional bathhouses, dance floors, things of that nature. Now, eventually, all these guys formed a partnership, and they constructed the Grand Pavilion, a 2-story building consisting of a number of entertainment offerings, such as a bowling alley, concert hall. Now, with beautiful Lake Erie right there, a number of entertainment offerings, how could you go wrong? Cedar Point was an instant success, jam-packed with people, right out of the gate. And 2 years after that, the park opened its first attraction, the water toboggan. And 2 years after that, the park opened its very first roller coaster. Now, as we know, Cedar Point is known for its coasters, but the Switchback Railway in 1892 was the very first one. Now, fast forward 5 years when the head honchos of the Lake Erie and Western Railroad came along, saw this immense potential sitting here, and purchased the entire peninsula for $256,000. And the Cedar Point Pleasure Resort Company was off and running. And George Arthur Bookling was announced the park's very first president. In 1899, the park opened its very first on-site lodging option, the Bay Shore Hotel. Moving on to the 20th century, in 1901, the park opened its second on-site hotel, the White House. And that year, we also saw the closure of the Switchback Railway. In 1902, the park constructed its second roller coaster, Loop the Loop. And it was also around this time frame that we saw the removal of the water toboggan slide. Now, by this time, the park was in full swing and doing banging business. And 3 years later, in 1905, we got the addition of an on-site hotel that is absolutely legendary and still there to this day, bringing in guests, and we're talking about Hotel Breakers. By 1908, we got the addition of another roller coaster, Dip the Dip's Scenic Railway. And the following year, 1909, we saw the removal of Loop the Loop. And in 1910, we got the addition of, you guessed it, another wooden roller coaster. That's what was going on in this time. We're talking about Racer. And 2 years after that, another wooden roller coaster, this one called Leap the Dips. In 1914, we got the first roadway connected to Cedar Point, the Cedar Point Chaussee. Now, with that option being available, the park's popularity took off even more. Now, in my opinion, just looking at the history of Cedar Point, this place was destined for greatness from the beginning. Skipping forward a year to 1915, the hotel The White House was remodeled and reopened as the Cedars. 2 years later, in 1917, we saw the removal of Dip the Dips, and the following year we had another roller coaster, the Leapfrog Railway. 1925, the park got a fun house, Noah's Ark. And 3 years later, in 1928, we saw the removal of that wood racing roller coaster, the Racer. But the following year, we got a replacement for that, a wood roller coaster named Cyclone. Jumping ahead to 1933, the Leapfrog Railway was renamed to High Frolics. Now, it was around this time frame that the Great Depression hit and took a dump on everybody. So not much really happened in the 1930s, which, understandable. Except for 1935, we saw the removal of Leap the Dips. And in 1940, we saw the removal of High Frolics. Jumping ahead to 1946, World War II has come to an end. The country's starting to get back on track. The world, actually, was starting to get back on track. And Cedar Point added one of its most infamous rides, the Midway Carousel. Still in operation today, sitting right at the front of the gates, the first thing you see when you enter the park. 5 years later, in 1951, we saw the removal of Cyclone. By 1952, the steamship service was pretty much all dried up, as everyone had an automobile, so that was discontinued. Now, World War II did do a number on Cedar Point, as it had no more operating roller coasters at this time frame, and was kinda in a financial mess. So by 1957, a couple of businessmen from Cleveland got together, wanted to keep it going and grow the park even more, and had the funds to do it. And they purchased Cedar Point. It was also that year that the second roadway connecting the Cedar Point Peninsula to the mainland opened up. We're talking about the Cedar Point Causeway, which is still in use to this day. 2 years later, we got a bunch of new things, as we saw the completion and opening of the Cedar Point Marina, which is still one of the largest marinas on all the Great Lakes. Plus, we got a wood-steel hybrid Wild Mouse coaster, a monorail, the turnpike cars, And the only negative thing was the removal of the Noah's Ark Funhouse. 2 years later in 1961, we had a trifecta of new attractions. A double-armed Ferris wheel known as the Giant Sky Wheel, a poor man's jungle cruise known as Paddle Wheel Excursions, and you can't go wrong with a rotor. In 1962, the park added another Wild Mouse coaster, this one known as Scamper, and the infamous Sky Ride, a 92-foot tall gondola attraction transporting guests from the main entrance to about the middle of the park, hovering over the park's midway. In 1963, the park removed its original Wild Mouse coaster, but added a log flume called Mill Race, and the park added its infamous train ride, the Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railroad. One of my favorite attractions at Cedar Point. Non-coaster, of course. 1964, the park added 2 roller coasters. First up, the infamous Blue Streak, manufactured by legendary PTC. It's right at the front of the park. When you're in line to get in, look to the left, you can't miss it. And the other addition being a little bit of an oddball. I'm talking about Broadway Trip from Mock Rides. It was an indoor Wild Mouse dark ride, kind of hybrid. Now, it came over from the Fun Forest Amusement Park in Seattle, Washington, and it only lasted at the point for 1 year, and after that year, it was tossed around for the rest of its existence. I won't bore you with the entire list of where this coaster went, but its final resting place was at Casino Pier in Seaside Heights, New Jersey, where it operated as Wizard's Cavern, and it met its demise in 2003. And to close out 1964, we had the removal of the rotor, but don't worry, it's on its way back shortly. 1965 saw a trifecta of new attractions. Up first, the Space Spiral, a 330-foot tall observation tower, giving guests a absolutely stunning view of Lake Erie and, of course, beautiful Cedar Point. Also that year, we got the addition of Earthquake, an aerodynamics indoor dark ride. Up next, the park added an interactive zoological experience known as Jungle Larry's African Safari. And to close out 1965, we saw the removal of the monorail. The following year, in 1966, we got the addition of an indoor dark ride known as Pirate Ride. Again, manufactured by Aerodynamics, and again, just like Earthquake, coming over from Freedomland, USA out of the Bronx. In 1967, the park reconstructed the rotor, opened its second log flume Shoot the Rapids, and added a super simple but super fun derby racer known as Cedar Downs Racing Derby. 1968, the park added its second chairlift-style gondola attraction, this one called Frontier Lift. Now, opposite to the Sky Ride, which covered the front half of the park, the Frontier Lift primarily covered the back end of the park. And to close out the 1960s in 1969, we had the removal of Scamper, and it was sent back into Gold Rush Junction in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, which we all know went on to become Dollywood. And it operated there for 2 seasons before it was dismantled and scrapped. But we got the addition of an Aerodynamics mine train, and of course I'm talking that little piece of legendary known as the Cedar Creek Mine Ride, still in operation today. Now, in my opinion, the 1960s really shaped the park on what it would grow to become, what we all know Cedar Point to be today. And we should all view this decade with fondness because it really was pivotal in the park's history. Moving on. 1970 brought a new roller coaster, a Schwarzkopf Wildcat called Wildcat, and a large walk-through aquarium known as Sealand. 1971 we got some new on-site lodging, Camper Village, a campground behind the park all the way in the back of the peninsula. 1972 we got 3 new attractions. The Giant Wheel, a Schwarzkopf Ferris wheel standing 145 feet tall. Another attraction from Anton Schwarzkopf, this one of his Jetstar roller coasters, known as Jumbo Jet. And why the not another carousel, this one called Frontier Carousel. The park was pretty quiet after that for about 3 years until 1975, when we got a 950-seat IMAX theater known as the Cedar Point Cinema, showing various films over the next couple decades. In 1976, the park broke some records and added the first roller coaster that featured 3 inversions, a looping aerodynamics roller coaster known as Corkscrew. The following year, we got the addition of a Huss Enterprise known as Witch's Wheel. 1978 was a pretty f***ing big year in the park's history. First up, we got a wood-steel hybrid racing roller coaster known as Gemini, manufactured by Aerodynamics. Designed perfectly, the trains almost pull into the station every time at the exact same time. Now, easily the biggest news of this year was something that would go on and shape the future of the amusement park industry as we know it, as Cedar Point purchased Valley Fair in Shakopee, Minnesota. Now, with the Valley Fair purchase, that led to some relocations and removals within Cedar Point. First up is the removal of Jumbo Jet. I would be here for hours if I told you every place this coaster went to. Nonetheless, it's still in operation today at Sholyalskintiv Park in Minsk, Belarus. operating under the same name. Schwarzkopfs were built to last, Daddy. And we also saw the removal of Wildcat, but that's okay because it was sent to Valley Fair, where it operated as Rails until 1995, and then it was sent to Jolly Roger Amusement Park in Ocean City, Maryland, where it operated there in 1999 to 2001 under its original name of Wildcat. Then for whatever reason it was put in storage, and it remained there for 14 years, and then in 2015 it was dug out of storage, reconstructed within the same park, and is still operating today under the same name. Now the reason Wildcat was removed from Cedar Point is because they bought another one of those. And obviously Cedar Point was more profitable park than Valley Fair, so they put the newer one at Cedar Point, moved the older one to Valley Fair, and in 1979 we got Wildcat version 2. In the addition of a kid's roller coaster in Junior Gemini. Cool fun fact about Junior Gemini, the very first roller coaster manufactured by the now legendary Intamin. 1980 saw the removal of the giant Sky Wheel, and the following year we saw the removal of Shoot the Rapids. But that year we got the addition of a Huss pirate ship known as Ocean Motion. 1982 saw the addition of an aerodynamics log flume known as Whitewater Landing. 1983 saw the addition of a first-generation freefall ride from Intamin known as Demon Drop. Also that year, 5 years after the purchase of Valley Fair, we got the official formation of the company, Cedar Fair. The following year we saw the removal of 2 attractions, the indoor dark ride known as Earthquake, and the Rotor, this time the Rotor for good. In the following year we had another removal as we said goodbye to the Frontier Lift, but we got the addition of an Intamin bobsled coaster known as Avalanche Run. 1986 we got the addition of an Intamin Rapids attraction known as Thunder Canyon. In 1987 we got the addition of a new roller coaster, an aerodynamic suspended model known as Iron Dragon. Fun fact, currently sits number 1 on my list of least favorite roller coasters. Now the following 2 years we had quite a bit done to the back right portion of the peninsula. First up in 1988 we got the addition of a water park, Soak City. The following year in 1989, you all know what happened in 1989. If you're a fan of amusement parks or just Cedar Point, you know what happened in 1989. They opened Magnum XL 200, manufactured by Aerodynamics, was the world's first hypercoaster, first roller coaster that topped the 200-foot mark, and is still in my all-time top 10. And also that year we saw Avalanche Run become an enclosed bobsled coaster, rethemed and renamed to Disaster Transport. Moving on to the 1990s, we got the addition of some on-site lodging, all the way at the very, very back of the peninsula in Sandcastle Suites. 1991 saw a 161-foot-tall behemoth built in the back of the park known as Mean Streak, manufactured by the Din Corporation. Never was a fan. Wasn't a fan of this one when it was around either. But I don't think any of us were. 1992 saw the park add a family fun center within the park, known as Challenge Park, featuring mini golf, some various upcharge attractions, things of that nature. In 1993, the park removed one of its water rides as we said goodbye to Mill Race, but we saw the addition of an aerodynamic shoot-the-chutes known as Snake River Falls. 1994 was the final year for the Frontier Carousel and Jungle Larry's African Safari, but added something quite special. A 137-foot-tall B&M invert known as Raptor, an ultra-intense, ultra-amazing B&M invert, one of their earlier ones, and still to this day one of their better ones, one of their finest piece of works within the invert genre. 1995 saw the Hotel Breakers get a major expansion. The following year, in 1996, we saw the removal of the Pirate Ride and the addition of another B&M coaster. This one of their stand-up models, which, you know, we all have our opinions about those. None of them good. In Mantis, standing 145 feet tall, racing guests at 60 miles per hour, but crushed their in the process. 1997 saw the addition of some swan boats, a Chance Chaos known as Chaos, and the debut of Cedar Point's Halloween event, Hallow Weekends. Still packing guests in to this day. Hallow Weekends usually has to turn people away because the park is at full capacity, and overall just a great time. 1998 saw an S&S combo tower come to the park, standing 300 feet tall, known as Power Tower. I always choose the launch side. And to close out the 20th century, we got a Vekoma Junior coaster come to the park in Woodstock Express. The year 2000 saw a new on-site lodging option added, as we said hello to the budget-friendly Breakers Express. But of course, the most memorable thing to happen this year was the addition of arguably the most important roller coaster ever built. The first Giga coaster manufactured by Intamin, standing 310 feet tall, featuring a drop of 300 feet, and you know I'm talking about Millennium Force. 2001, we had some more on-site lodging added to the park. Another campground in Lighthouse Point. Also that year, we saw the removal of the Sealand Aquarium. 2002 saw the addition of a 215-foot tall intimate impulse coaster known as Wicked Twister, sitting right next to the beach, right next to Lake Erie, an absolutely beautiful roller coaster. It was also that year we saw the Cedar Point Cinema get renamed to Good Times Theater. 2003 we saw the park reach for the stars, as hey, they were the first to top the 200-foot mark with the roller coaster, the first to top the 300-foot mark with the debut of Top Thrill Dragster. Manufactured by Intamin and standing a staggering 420 feet, launching riders 0 to 120 miles per hour in a matter of seconds. One of the most thrilling attractions ever built, hands down. And also that year we said farewell to the Swan boats as they were relocated to Michigan's Adventure. The following year in 2004 we saw the park add, yet again, some more on-site lodging. This one featuring its own indoor water park, Castaway Bay, kind of serving as Cedar Point's moderate resort, in my opinion. 2005, the park added my all-time favorite flat ride, or at least in my top 5. Alright, in my top 5. Max Air, a Hush giant frisbee standing 141 feet tall, an absolute blast. And that year was also the final operating year of Whitewater Landing. 2006, the park added another thrilling flat ride, an S&S Scream and Swing known as Skyhawk, and at the time of its opening was the largest of its kind in the world. Who are we kidding? This is Cedar Point. They're all the largest of the kind when they open. But the park proved me wrong in 2007 because they proved that, hey, we don't have to build the biggest, baddest son of a out there to make a great world-class attraction. And they did just that with Maverick, an Intamin launch coaster standing only 100 feet tall, but which, isn't small, but this thing packs such a huge punch, one of my all-time favorite rides ever. 2008, we saw the park add a very notable attraction within the Challenge Park portion of Cedar Point. And we're talking about a Gravity Works booster known as Skyscraper. Those attractions are highly unreliable, but are beyond the words fun. 2009 saw the removal of Demon Drop, and that was sent back into Dorney Park, where it still operates today. 2010 brought the removal of Chaos, but the addition of the second incarnation of Shoot the Rapids. This one an Intamin log flume standing 85 feet tall. 2011 saw another 300-foot tall attraction added to the park. This one a Mondial Star Flyer known as Windseeker. Also that year we bid farewell to Wildcat and the Pedal Wheel Excursions. 2012 saw Fastlane come to the park, Cedar Fair's upcharge skip the line option. We also saw the debut of Dinosaurs Alive, a giant animatronic dinosaur walkthrough attraction, and the removal of the Space Spiral and Disaster Transport, which were right next to each other, which led to great speculation on what was going in there. And we got that answer the following year in Gatekeeper, a 170-foot tall B&M wing coaster, largest of its kind in the world, hovering over the main entranceway of Cedar Point. It's a visually stunning roller coaster and pretty fun. 2014 saw Junior Gemini get renamed to Wilderness Run, the debut of a Zamperla disco known as Pipe Scream, the closure and removal of the Good Times Theater and the Turnpike cars, and we also saw Mantis close. But that was to reopen the following year with its stand-up trains removed and floorless trains put on and was now referred to as Rougarou. Also in 2015 we saw the removal of 2 attractions as we said goodbye to Skyscraper and Shoot the Rapids. 2016 saw a 223-foot tall, absolutely ginormous B&M custom-built dive coaster added to the park in Valraven. And also that year we saw the closure of Challenge Park as a whole, and the closure of that huge monstrosity in the back known as Mean Streak. The following year in 2017 we saw the Sandcastle Suites close its doors for good, and we also saw a pair of rebrands as the Breakers Express was now referred to moving forward as Cedar Point's Express Hotel, horrendous name, and the Soak City Water Park get rebranded as Cedar Point Shores. The following year in 2018 we saw the Hotel Breakers yet again get another expansion, and we saw the removal of that dinosaur walkthrough attraction, Dinos Alive, and also the removal of the Witch's Wheel. But 2018 is easily most remembered for when they took that huge piece of structure all the way in the back, formerly known as Mean Streak, hire RMC, and create the greatest roller coaster ever built in Steel Vengeance. Standing 200 feet tall, racing guests at 74 miles per hour. This thing is so disorienting. Enough's been said about it already. Absolutely amazing. 2019 saw another lodging option added for the park, and we're talking about Sawmill Creek. And we also saw the debut of the Forbidden Frontier on Adventure Island, a giant family walkthrough attraction. In 2020, the park's 150th anniversary was delayed because of the mass hysteria that was 2020. But 1 year later in 2021, the celebration took place. And that year we also saw the debut of Snake River Expedition, which is kind of like a sequel to the paddle wheel excursions. And also by the end of that year was the removal of Wicked Twister. 2022 saw the abrupt closure of Top Thrill Dragster as we knew it. And 2023 will see the second roller coaster referred to as Wild Mouse within the park's history, this one manufactured by Zamperla, and I think was a perfect addition. The park really needed a good, solid family coaster. This park was a doozy to do. Very long and detailed history, but man, it was fun to make. I have been to a ton of theme parks in my time. Not every single one, but a ton. And Cedar Point is solid in my top 5. I think if you asked most theme park enthusiasts, they would say the same thing. It's that good of a park. Its lineup, top to bottom, remarkable. If you consider yourself a fan of this business, you have to get to Cedar Point at least once. It's a great place.